Hi and welcome to Consider This. I'm Sharaad Kuttan. I'm here in Melaka to observe the elections. I'm speaking to Kerk Chee. He's one of the candidates for the Ayer state constituency. He's in fact the incumbent. He won the seat in 2018 with a very handsome majority, over 9,000 votes, 65%. But that was on a voter turnout of 87% for the constituency. So quite an extraordinary moment in Melaka history when the Pakatan Harapan government came to power. He was made EXCO, in charge of communications, multimedia, NGO, youth and sports, because he lost that position when the Pakatan Harapan government fell subsequently. Chee, lots to talk about, and thank you so much for doing this. I know you're up against the MCA and Gerakan candidates. Keroh, reasonably small constituency, I guess, but let's start with the basic question, which is, why is Melaka even having this election? And I think some critics are suggesting that Pakatan Harapan Melaka should have done a CSCA with the existing government, the Perikatan National Government, to avoid an election. What would your response be to that?
In fact, I think this whole election started because there was an internal fight within Perikatan Nasional. And as what we can see in this election, there isn't just one coalition from the governing coalition, which is Perikatan Nasional. There's actually a split, which is why you see Barisan Nasional and then Perikatan Nasional. So, in fact, the position of Pakatan Harapan when this whole political episode happened, our stand was, okay, if this has to happen, we have to think, how do we deal with it? And the position that we took collectively, although there was, it wasn't what sebulat suara agreement within, but there was a consensus within PH Melaka and as well as PH National to deal with the situation. But then I think the decision to dissolve our state assembly was a decision by few men in the UMNO, which is the then Chief Minister Yang Muhammad Sulaiman, as well as the Chief of UMNO in Melaka, which is Dato Sri Rauf. I think the decision to dissolve state assembly wasn't agreed by everybody, even within UMNO. Of course, for Pakatan Harapan, we disagree with that because we thought that first, it's pandemic. So in the period of pandemic, I don't think that we should have an election which may further jeopardize the health and every other risk.
But I want to ask you if there was a desire on the part of some people in Pakatan Harapan, maybe people in your party as well, to kind of return the people's mandate, a mandate that they won in 2018. Was there a desire that, without going to elections, that somehow a new government could be formed after the defections from Perikatan Nasional?
In fact, since the MOU was signed between parties at the national level, the order that we received was to work hard and prepare for the next election. And then when we were told that there was some internal fight among the ADUNs within Perikatan Nasional, and then there's a possible fall of the current government and whatever, the decision that we had to make at that point was whether we deal with it or we just stay away. So the consensus was we have to deal with that, and then of course.
But why wasn't a CSA a possibility? Why not, deal with the Perikatan government? If the 4 defectors would have not have made a difference if Pakatan was solidly behind Perikatan and made deal, was that ever a possibility?
Because the CSA offer was made few times to Pakatan Harapan. This was also confirmed by our policy. By the Perikatan, by UMNO in specific, because this is in Melaka context. So CSA or whatever discussion was actually held few times informally between the leaders of Pakatan Harapan as well as Perikatan Nasional. But that was only offered to us when they were running into some kind of trouble. So we thought that the CSA wasn't just a political transaction. I think it is a necessary reform because we want to show that the opposition actually can play a bigger role in the context of political and governance, you see. But at that point in time, we were offered at least 2 to 3 times. some sort of CSA. So at that point, when we were offered, then we kept the option open and said, okay, let's talk about it. How can we, let's say we can be appointed into some sort of jawatan kuasa khas to talk about COVID, so that our role as opposition can be further empowered. But then when the political crisis was somehow solved back then, during the fall of Muhyiddin government, the discussion wasn't continued by Perikatan Nasional. So this happens at least for at least 2 to 3 times before the final episode.
Okay, so I find it fascinating, talking to politicians. They have their reasoning, they build their narratives very clearly. The question is, does this narrative jive with how people experience it? Do they, or are they persuaded that this is actually what happened? What is the feeling on the ground today when you go out on your campaigns or whatever limitations there might be on it? Are people angry that that this election is happening, and how are they going to respond to those feelings?
I think the initial response, we share the same initial response with them. We thought that this election was unnecessary. We thought that this is a waste of time, waste of effort by everybody, just because of the power struggle within Perikatan Nasional. But in fact, after this is irreversible, we have to face an election, which is something done in a hurry. I think this is a good chance for the Malakans, because for me personally, I think that this is a reset button for us. You see, in the past 4 years, we have experienced 3 governments, from Barisan Nasional to Pakatan Harapan and then to Perikatan Nasional. These 3 governments share different traits: the style of our leadership, the policy that we put forward, and the way we execute our policy. So I think the Malakans can still remember very well what's the performance by these 3 governments. And in fact, in the past 1.5 years, especially since Langkah Sheraton, the whole sentiment was quite negative, especially for politicians. So there's a vacuum, and also there's a distrust in general between the people and the politicians. So for me, this might be a good chance to reset everything, because now that they have a chance to make a choice.
Right. Okay. So the question comes back to how people are reading it, right? You say it's a chance to reset, and I know that I understand your narrative, but the question is, will you get the 87% turnout that delivered you a very handsome victory in Keroh? Will you get that? Or are people going to stay away? Are the people who live outside of Melaka not going to bother coming back? Are there people here who say, I'm not going to come out on polling day? Let it be, because nothing really changes.
In fact, we hear that every day. This is in fact this is the main narrative of our election, which is to encourage people to come out and vote. Because as I said, this is a chance to reset everything, not only resetting who governs Melaka for the next 5 years, this also resets the whole political landscape. Because first, you can actually compare the 3 coalitions who have governed before, and one of them is going to govern Melaka for the next 5 years.
Okay, let's talk about the PH administration and how much you delivered. Speaking honestly, I know of course you're going to talk up the Pakatan Harapan track record, but there are people who say Pakatan didn't do enough. Maybe there wasn't enough time, maybe there was not political will, or they did things that sounded or looked like what previous Barisan National government did. For instance, I think in rebranding Institute Tun Perak, they put a political nominee as the head of this think tank. Now, these kinds of practices stick in the throats of some people. Say, well, Pakatan Harapan should have done better. They should have pushed more. They should have been different. Were you significantly different from what came before and then what came after?
If you ask me, yes. We were not given enough time. 22 months was very short, and in fact, we were first-term government. So a lot of things that we tried to do, we actually spent some time trying to understand how to make it work. And then this is on top of all the existing challenges that we have to face internally within the government sector and everything. But yes, on the point of political appointees, in fact, I'm not against political appointment entirely. And the reason for that is, I think if you don't appoint, if the government don't appoint someone to hold important position within the government agencies, for example, who is going to appoint them? In fact, I think the proper...
Or rather, who should be appointed?
Yeah.
The argument would be that it's professionals.
Yes.
And that if professionals lead it, then you don't have to keep changing these appointments every time we have a change of government.
But you see, the power to appoint someone is either lies in the hand of politician or political party who governs, which can be challenged and changed by the people. The power is in people's hand. Or you hand over this kind of power to something that people cannot directly influence. So I think in terms of political appointments, the problem with political appointment is not who appoints, but who to be appointed. So if I appoint someone who cannot perform, if I appoint someone because of cronyism or whatever, you punish me in the next election. So for that matter, I think it's something that we can prove to the people that via what we achieved in the 22 months. In fact, there are plenty of policies that we have achieved, even on manifesto. I think within 22 months, we have completed and started more than 80% of our Melaka manifesto, which is something quite positive.
Well, I hope your voters believe that. Okay, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back with Consider This in just a moment. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Sharaad Kuttan. With me, Kerk Chee. He's the Keroh candidate for Pakatan Harapan. He's with the DAP. He won the seat handsomely in 2018 with 65% of the vote, and that was with a voter turnout of 87%. The question is, will those levels be maintained, and who's going to suffer as a consequence of a lower voter turnout that everybody's expecting, but yet to see. So, Chee, so we talked about, a little bit about voter sentiment. I want to come back to the fact that in this constituency of Keroh, you're up against an MCA candidate, Mr. Yong Fun Juan, and then also Gerakan candidate, Mr. Michael Gan. It's ethnically, and I don't know if this is important, but you have to explain this to me. Ethnically, it's quite split. It's in terms of the two major communities, Malay and Chinese, is about almost equal in size. If you could please correct me if I'm wrong. What are the dynamics here in Keroh in terms of the electoral game?
So I think Keroh, in fact, before 2008, Keroh was a stronghold, BN stronghold, Barisan Nasional. We have only captured Keroh after 2008, and this is the fourth election that we have to face. In fact, in Keroh, for the past 3 years, we have actually done quite a few things for Keroh. One of the most concerning issues in Keroh is flash floods. I think this happens to some other areas as well. And then for Keroh, during the 22 months when Pakatan Harapan governed, we did quite a few major projects that can help to reduce the risk of flash floods. So I think that is one of the more important local issues that Pakatan Harapan has addressed. But of course, this cannot completely solve the issue. So when Perikatan Nasional was in charge, we have also proposed something to the Perikatan Nasional government, but of course none of them has been executed. So I think the overall sentiment, especially for the few locations where flash flood often happens, was quite negative against Perikatan Nasional, because in just within 3.5 years we have seen projects going on within during Pakatan Harapan's tenure, and then nothing can be done for.
Okay, so you're saying that at least on the question of flash floods, the Pakatan Harapan's record will stand.
Yeah, that was just one issue.
Okay, so what are the other issues, and how do they balance out? Maybe more national issues matter? Do party loyalties matter? Obviously, you're saying to me it used to be Barisan Nasional stronghold, and then it switched over. What if you can help us understand, in the mind of voters, what tips the balance? Because people are sometimes doggedly loyal to a party regardless of what their leaders do, convicted in court and whatever, still they will vote for those parties. So what is shifting the ground, is the ground shifting in Keroh?
I think in Keroh it's about the same as every other areas at large. I think the most concerning issue is for them who will lead Melaka for the next 5 years. And we have been going around this 1-2 weeks after the nomination. We have been receiving quite positive comments for Pakatan Harapan. Of course, there were concerns on COVID-19, whether should they come out and vote. There were also complaints about this whole politics is so messy and whatever. But eventually, when we sit down and talk to them, okay, so do you still want to vote? They say yes, because this is, this vote will last for 5 years. So who is going to govern us is something important, especially we are at this juncture where we will face a next phase called endemic, which means COVID-19 will stay with us for quite a while, and then we are here to also recover economy. So we need strong leadership at the state level.
Okay, can you help us understand a little bit about the impact that the pandemic has made, especially in a state like Melaka, where there's a huge dependency on tourism and there's perhaps a lack of jobs here for young people, and people are living away. How does that all factor into the kind of leadership that voters want? And who is it? A younger group of voters that want this, or older group of voters that want change? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, I would think that there were few instances where people were really worried about Perikatan National Government. I think in Keroh there was actually this incident. It happened in July this year. We call it the factory cluster, where within 3 weeks, in the span of 3 weeks, there were more than 1,200 positive cases in one locality. So at that point in time, around the period also there were other areas like Machap and Portuguese settlement, for example. Same thing has happened there. So for us, what should have been done, and we have been writing to the government to say, hey, please do this, was something we call a targeted mass testing. So you should not only test people in the factory, but you should test the local communities as well. That wasn't done. We were given answers such as, okay, we do our best, for example, like that, but that wasn't done. And then in terms of economy and all this, I think this is a whole. This is actually one package of issues. When you do not have a strong leadership, especially in policy making, we will fail. The government will fail in tackling the real issues and then recovering the economy.
Right, so poor governance ought to be a barometer of whether a political party or coalition wins elections, but I think in Malaysia that's not true necessarily. Poor performance can be rewarded in elections. And I want to ask you about what we're likely to see, because the DAP almost often delivers on the seats that it's been allotted. It's your partners, Amanah and PKR, that have perhaps a greater struggle in terms of delivering the seats. Now, in terms of the formation of a government post-election, where do you think the challenges will be? Do you think your partners will be able to deliver, especially in the kind of, as it were, Malay heartland of Melaka? Can Amanah and PKR deliver, and also, coupled with the choices they've made to include those former UMNO leaders?
Yeah, of course, we know the conventional seats that DAP has won in the past few decades. They have been relatively our strong seat. So the next challenge is, how do we deliver as a whole? We as Pakatan Harapan deliver the seats in election as a whole. So not only that, it's not like DAP is only working on the ground in DAP seats, PKR on his own, Amanah on his own. I think this is also why I think that a common logo is very significant for this election, because we want to tell people that when we govern, it's not that DAP is governing, PKR is governing, or Amanah. This is a whole coalition, and we have agreed on the Chief Minister position, which is our former Chief Minister, Adli Zahari.
He's from Amanah, and the smallest party of the coalition, isn't it? I mean, in terms of seats won.
Yeah, in terms of seats won, they won 2 seats in the past.
Right.
They contested 6 in GE14. But I think the dynamic within PH is quite different from Barisan Nasional or Perikatan Nasional for this matter. In PH, we have equal power in negotiation, and we do things based on consensus. This is not something like what my opponent from MCA has said, or because they don't have many seats, so they cannot negotiate, and they always lose out on important decisions. So there was no one dominant party within PH.
Okay, but I must say that on the question of the inclusion of the former Chief Minister, UMNO Chief Minister of Melaka, there was some dissent, because while there was a coalition decision, the DAP and members of the DAP continued to signal their unhappiness. And I wonder, was that, was it you guys playing to your ground while keeping the fiction of a kind of consensus, or what was happening there? Why did the DAP continue to express its unhappiness about this decision?
Well, because we really did not think it was a good idea to do so, because first it goes against the principle that we believe in, and as well as we think that even on a strategic level, this might not help PH as a whole. We should continue to hold on to our moral high ground.
Will it damage the DAP?
In fact, yes. But of course, the decision has always need to go to PH level, and which is why in the end a consensus was made. And then DAP, as one of the coalition partner within PH, we have to abide by the decision. This is a consensus.
Okay. Well, let's just put aside politics and talk a bit of policy before we have to wrap up the show. I want to ask you about the ability of state governments like Melaka to navigate the kind of policy direction for themselves, right? I mean, how much power do you have in terms of, say, weaning the state off dependence on tourism, or addressing unemployment and low wages? Is that something within the hands of a state government? Is it actually possible?
It's actually possible. As you mentioned, tourism is the biggest contributor to our state GDP, about 40+%. The other 40% is, of course, the industrial. So in our state administration, we have necessary agencies that talks about tourism within Melaka, and of course, especially in the time of pandemic, and now we are trying to recover, we believe that we need to offer some help to some of the industrial players in the tourism sector. This cannot be done by them alone. This can be done by the market alone. Government must intervene, which is why I think when the government intervenes, it's not enough to just pump in money. I give you some grants or whatever. There should be some more sophisticated method in determining which sector should recover faster, or which sector we should put in more resources, or for that matter. In fact, it's not just tourism. Within the Pakatan Harapan government, there were discussions to talk about how do we make sure we can make Melaka a youth state, where if we invest in youth will stay in Melaka, and then we can develop Melaka together. I think this is a whole package which not only can you recover tourism, for example, in a short span of time, but in the longer run you set a foundation for us to be a regional youth hub.
Okay, very quickly, less than 1 minute. If if Melaka goes to Pakatan Harapan, but you have a federal government that is hostile to it, can any of these plans be put in place?
It will be much harder, but I think this can at least be a good start for us.
Thank you so much, Kerk.
Thank you.
I've been speaking to Kerk Chee. He is the incumbent in the State Assembly seat of Ayer, and he's going to be facing the polls on Saturday, the 21st of November. This has been Consider This. I'm Sharaad Kuttan, only for Astro AWANI.